The desert holds secrets older than memory, and among them walks a horror whose name means cannibal. In the shadows of the American Southwest, the ancient Zuni people told of Atahsaia, a towering demon with a taste for human flesh. This is not just a monster story, it is a window into a world where spiritual balance is a constant battle for survival. By the end of this journey, you will understand the profound fears and timeless lessons locked within this terrifying legend. We will uncover why this creature specifically hunted women and how the gods themselves had to intervene. What kind of monster is born from the deepest fears of a civilization? To understand the demon, we must first know the world that gave it life. The story of Atahsaia begins not with a monster, but with a people deeply rooted in the high desert of what is now New Mexico. For over 1,000 years, the Zuni have lived in their ancestral home along the Zuni River Valley, a landscape of stark beauty and immense spiritual significance. Theirs is a culture built on a profound relationship with the land, where every mesa, every spring, and every stone is woven into their identity. This connection is the very bedrock of their existence, a living tapestry of history, ceremony, and belief. Their world is not simply a physical place to inhabit, it is a sacred, animated whole. Within this worldview, the spiritual and the earthly are inseparable. The winds carry prayers, the rivers hold memories, and the shadows at the edge of the village could conceal beings both benevolent and cruel. It is from this rich, interconnected reality that a figure like Atahsaia emerges, a manifestation of the deepest anxieties that threaten their harmonious way of life. In this balanced cosmos, nothing exists in isolation. Every object, from the grandest mountain to the smallest stone, possesses its own spirit or life force. This belief creates a world that is profoundly alive and interconnected, where humanity's role is not to dominate, but to participate respectfully in a vast, sacred community. Central to maintaining this delicate balance are the Kachinas, the ancestral spirit messengers who bridge the human and divine realms. They are not distant gods, but vital intermediaries, appearing in elaborate ceremonies to bring rain, offer guidance, and reinforce the moral order of the Zuni world. Their presence is a gift, a tangible connection to the forces that sustain life. But a world defined by harmony and order must, by its very nature, acknowledge the forces that oppose it. This is where a being like Atahsaia finds his terrible purpose. He is not a random monster, but a necessary counterforce, an embodiment of the chaos and imbalance that constantly threaten to unravel the social and spiritual fabric. Think of it like a tapestry where the bright threads of the Kachinas represent prayer, rain, and community. Atahsaia is the dark, fraying strand, the ever-present threat of drought, starvation, and social discord. His existence reminds the people that their world is not a paradise, but a sacred space that must be actively defended through ritual, courage, and collective virtue. So when this demon emerges from the shadows, he is not merely a physical danger. He is a walking manifestation of their deepest anxieties, a test of their spiritual resilience. How does a community stand against a force that seeks to devour the very order that gives their lives meaning? His name itself is a shudder, Atahsaia, a word that translates directly and horrifyingly to cannibal or man-eater. But to the Zuni, this was far more than a descriptive term for a monster. Cannibalism represented the absolute inversion of their world's sacred order, the ultimate act of consumption that shattered every social and spiritual bond. In a culture built on reciprocity with the land and community, where hunting was a ritual act of respect and sharing food reinforced kinship, the idea of consuming another human being was the deepest possible taboo. It was not merely murder, it was a complete annihilation of the natural relationship between beings, a descent into a chaos where life feeds on itself in a destructive cycle. A cannibal was not just a predator, they were a force of pure, unredeemable evil, someone who had severed their connection to the life-giving forces of the world. That is why Atahsaia's title is so terrifying. He is not called the man-killer or the fearsome one. He is named for the act that defines his very essence, the consumption of human flesh. This makes him the ultimate embodiment of terror, a walking, breathing violation of all that the Zuni held sacred. His existence is a constant, looming threat that the delicate balance of their world could be torn apart by a hunger that knows no boundaries. The terror Atahsaia inspired was made manifest in his nightmarish form. He was a giant of sinew and rage, a creature whose very silhouette against the desert sky promised violence. His body was a mass of corded muscle, towering over any human, built not for speed but for the brutal power needed to seize and crush his prey. His hands ended not in fingers but in long, curving claws, blackened and sharp as obsidian shards, capable of tearing through hardened clay walls or human flesh with equal ease. A wild, tangled mane of coarse hair framed a face of pure malevolence, but it was his mouth that defined his horrifying purpose. It was a vast, gaping maw, stretching far wider than any human jaw, a grotesque opening lined with rows of jagged, fang-like teeth. These were not the teeth of a hunter who kills cleanly. They were the tools of a cannibal designed for ripping and grinding, a permanent, horrifying grin that spoke only of consumption. This was the physical embodiment of the taboo, a walking hunger given terrifying shape. This creature of absolute transgression made his home in the places the Zuni people feared most. Atahsaia did not lurk in the shadows of the pueblo, but far beyond the comforting glow of hearth fires, deep within the untamed wilderness. His lair was a dark, gaping cave, carved into the side of a remote canyon or hidden within a labyrinth of sandstone cliffs. These were the chaotic, ungoverned spaces that existed in stark opposition to the orderly, prayer-filled world of the villagers. To the Zuni, the landscape was a map of meaning. Their pueblos were the center of the universe, places of community, agriculture, and sacred ritual. The further one traveled from this center, the more the world became unpredictable and spiritually dangerous. The deep canyons and high mesas were the domain of raw, powerful spirits, both helpful and harmful. By choosing such a dwelling, Atahsaia was declaring his nature. He was the ultimate outsider, a being not just opposed to human civilization, but fundamentally alien to its very principles of order, harmony, and life. His cave was a physical manifestation of his soul, a void of darkness and isolation from which only hunger could emerge. Think of the desert at night, far from any village. The wind howls through the canyon with a voice that is not human. The shadows are not mere absences of light, but seem to have a substance and a presence of their own. This is the realm Atahsaia called home, a place where the rules of community and reciprocity held no power. His cave was a pocket of pure chaos, a wound in the side of the orderly world, and from its depths he would emerge to hunt. Out of that chaotic darkness, Atahsaia's hunger focused with terrifying precision. He did not hunt men, warriors who might meet him in battle. His prey was the very heart of the Zuni world, the women and the children they protected. This was not random violence. It was a calculated, symbolic assault on the community's future. In Zuni society, women were the ultimate life-givers and nurturers. They were the farmers who coaxed corn from the desert soil, the potters who shaped clay into vessels of life, the keepers of the home where the next generation was raised. To consume a woman was to consume the potential for life itself. It was an attack on fertility, on continuity, on the sacred cycle of birth and growth that sustained the entire pueblo. Each woman taken was not just a life lost, but a thread pulled from the fabric of the future, leaving the community weaker, more vulnerable, and descending further into despair. Why would a demon target the most vital source of a society's strength? Because his goal was not merely to feed, but to unravel. he sought to extinguish the central flame around which all life gathered. This monstrous preference reveals a deeper layer of his evil. By focusing on women and children, Atahsaia was actively severing the chain of kinship and knowledge. A child represents the community's hope, the living embodiment of all the stories, songs, and skills that will be passed down. A mother is the guardian of that transmission. When the demon consumed them, he was devouring more than flesh. He was consuming memory, tradition, and the promise of tomorrow. Imagine the profound terror this would instill. The most fundamental act of a community, protecting its young and its bearers of life, becomes the very thing that draws the monster's attention. The safety of the home, the warmth of the hearth, these were not sanctuaries but potential hunting grounds. This transformed Atahsaia from a physical threat into a psychological specter of existential dread. His shadow fell not just on individuals but on the idea of family itself. How does a people fight an enemy whose victory is measured not in battles won, but in cradles left empty and futures stolen? This was the ultimate perversion, a force that fed on hope itself, leaving only a silent, chilling void where life should have been. This deliberate choice of prey reveals a fear far deeper than the dread of a physical monster. Atahsaia is a manifestation of the community's most profound anxieties, given a terrifying face and a name. The wilderness he calls home was not just a physical space of danger, but a psychological frontier representing everything beyond human control. It was the domain of drought, of failed crops, of the slow, creeping threat of starvation. In a culture sustained by agriculture in an unforgiving desert, the fear of famine was ever present. Atahsaia, the cannibal, becomes the ultimate symbol of that hunger. He is not just a creature that eats people, he is the embodiment of the land itself turning against its inhabitants, a force of consumption that mirrors the desperation of a community with no food. His gaping maw is the hunger of a barren field, his relentless hunting the specter of a winter with empty storage pits. He externalizes the internal terror of a society living on the knife's edge of survival. Furthermore, his very existence is a violation of the sacred social order. The Zuni world was built on reciprocity, on a carefully maintained balance between people, the land, and the spirit world. Atahsaia shatters this balance completely. He takes without giving, consumes without respect, and destroys the bonds of kinship that are the foundation of community. By targeting women, the cultivators of life, he attacks the principle of creation itself. This represents a fear of societal collapse, of a world where the rules no longer apply and chaos reigns. What if the prayers to the Kachinas went unanswered? What if the rains failed and the social contract broke down, forcing people to turn on one another? Atahsaia is that nightmare scenario personified, a walking warning of what happens when harmony is lost. He is the antithesis of the Kachina spirits, a being of pure taking in a world built on giving. His terror also lies in exposing the vulnerability at the very heart of the community. The home, the hearth, the fields where women worked, these were supposed to be the safest spaces, the centers of life and nurturing. Atahsaia's predation transforms these sanctuaries into front lines. He makes the entire world feel unsafe, injecting a pervasive dread into everyday life. The sound of the wind at night is no longer just the wind, it could be his approach. A shadow near the cornfield is no longer just a shadow, it could be his form. This demon weaponizes the ordinary, turning the familiar landscape of home into a place of potential horror. He represents the fear that the dangers of the wild cannot be kept at the village's edge, that they can penetrate the strongest walls and threaten the most cherished lives. He is the ultimate breach of security, a reminder that no matter how ordered and peaceful a society may seem, there are always forces of chaos waiting in the darkness, hungry and relentless. Yet his most chilling weapon was not his strength but his mind. Atahsaia was a master of deception, a predator who understood human vulnerability better than any beast. He could weave illusions that turned the familiar into a trap, Imagine a woman hearing the voice of her child calling for help from just beyond the cornfield, a desperate, pleading cry that tugs at her very soul. She rushes out, her heart pounding with fear for her little one, only to find the voice leads her deeper into the gathering shadows, away from the safety of the village walls. The voice was never her child. It was Atahsaia, his throat twisting the sounds of human speech into a perfect, cruel imitation. He used the deepest bonds of love and protection as his bait. He did not just chase his prey, he invited them to walk willingly into his clutches. This ability to mimic and deceive made him infinitely more dangerous than a simple monster of claw and tooth. He could appear as a lost traveler in need of aid, or even cloak himself in a shroud of darkness that made him nearly invisible until it was too late. His intelligence transformed the entire landscape into a potential snare. A strangely shaped rock, a sudden movement in the peripheral vision, an unexpected sound echoing in a canyon, any of these could be his doing. He studied human behavior, learning what would provoke curiosity, what would inspire pity, and what would trigger the irresistible urge to help. He turned their greatest strengths, their community and compassion, into fatal weaknesses. How do you defend against an enemy who does not just break down your door, but politely knocks while wearing the face of a friend? This cunning elevated him from a physical terror to a psychological phantom, a being who weaponized trust itself. His presence meant you could not even believe your own ears, that the very sounds of your world could be a lie designed to end your life. One story tells of a young woman gathering clay by a dry riverbed as the evening sun stretched the shadows. She was far from the village, her thoughts on the fine pottery she would craft, when a child's cry cut through the silence. It was a desperate, familiar sound, the voice of her little nephew. Her heart seized, and she dropped her basket, running toward the weeping that seemed to come from behind a stand of juniper trees. But as she drew closer, the voice shifted, moving further up the canyon wall. It called her name now, pleading for help. A cold dread washed over her, for she remembered the old warnings. A true child's cry would not drift like smoke on the wind. This was a law. Stopping in her tracks, she saw a massive, dark shape detach itself from the shadows near the trees. It was Atahsaia, his wide mouth a gash of disappointment in the gloom. His illusion had failed. Thinking quickly, the woman did not scream or run. Instead, she called out in a strong, clear voice, thanking the being for his guidance and offering a prayer to the Kachina spirits. She spoke not to the monster, but to the sacred powers he defied. At the sound of those holy names, the demon recoiled, his form seeming to waver like a mirage. He let out a roar of pure frustration before melting back into the gathering darkness, defeated not by a weapon, but by a woman's wisdom and her unwavering connection to the spiritual world that was his antithesis. Against such a cunning and supernatural foe, the Zuni people were not defenseless. Their society forged its own guardians, warriors whose strength was matched only by their spiritual resolve. These were the bow priests and the members of the warrior societies, men trained from youth not only in the art of combat but in the complex rituals needed to confront beings from the spirit world. They stood as the human embodiment of the community's will to survive, the disciplined force of order arrayed against the formless hunger of the demon. While the Kachinas represented divine assistance from the spirit realm, these warriors were the earthly spear point, the ones who would physically stand between their people and the encroaching darkness. Their duty was immense, a sacred charge to protect the physical and spiritual integrity of the pueblo. They were the necessary answer to a threat like Atahsaia, a declaration that humanity would not be passive prey. How does a society train its children to fight monsters? The answer lies in a life of extreme discipline and devotion. A boy showing promise would be brought into a warrior society where his training was as much about prayer, fasting, and memorizing sacred songs as it was about mastering the bow and the spear. He learned to see the world as a battlefield between harmony and chaos, understanding that his role was to defend the former against the latter. The Bo priests in particular held a position of immense authority and responsibility. They were the war chiefs and the high priests combined, leaders who could call for war, organize defenses, and perform the powerful ceremonies required to nullify dark magic. Their very presence was a symbol of the community's united front. When Atahsaia stole a life from the village, it was these men who would gather, not in a frenzy of rage but in a solemn council. They would seek visions and signs, using their deep knowledge of the demon's habits and weaknesses to plan their counterattack. They did not hunt for glory, but for restoration, to reweave the torn fabric of their world and demonstrate that the forces of order would always answer the call of chaos. This sets the stage for an inevitable cosmic clash, a confrontation that would test the very limits of human courage and divine favor. But these human warriors knew they could not face Atahsaia alone. When the demon's cunning and power proved too great for mortal strength, the people called upon their most powerful allies, the Kachina spirits. From their celestial home in the distant lakes and mountains, these ancestral beings would hear the desperate prayers rising from the pueblo. They did not remain as distant, abstract gods. They descended physically and powerfully into the human world to wage war on the people's behalf. Their arrival was not a subtle thing. It was often heralded by a shift in the wind, a sudden chill in the desert air, or the faint, growing sound of sacred bells. They manifested as towering, majestic figures, their forms a blend of the human and the divine, often masked and adorned with symbols of rain, animals, and the life-giving forces of the earth. Where Atahsaia represented consumption and void, the Kachinas were the embodiment of creation and order, and they would not allow his chaos to go unchallenged. The confrontation was a clash of cosmic opposites. Atahsaia, a creature of brute force and deception, would find his illusions useless against their pure spiritual perception. They could see through his darkness and unravel his mimicking voices. The Kachinas did not fight with ordinary weapons. Their power was drawn from the sacred essence of the world itself. They wielded bolts of lightning, summoned torrential rains to flood his canyon lair, and directed the very winds to push him back. Their voices could chant songs of binding, spells that wove around the demon like ethereal chains, sapping his strength and confusing his senses. Imagine the sight from a village wall, watching these luminous beings corner the hulking demon in the pale moonlight. Atahsaia, who terrorized humans with such ease, would be driven back step by roaring step by the Kachina's relentless, sacred onslaught. He was a force of hunger, but they were the force of the world's will to live. They did not seek to destroy him utterly, for he was part of the world's balance, a necessary symbol of the threat that gave their protection meaning. Instead, they drove him back, banishing him to the deepest, most remote wilderness, reinforcing the boundary between the ordered world of the village and the chaotic wild where such beings belonged. Their victory was a restoration, a reaffirmation that the community, supported by the divine, could always push back the encroaching darkness. The legend tells of a night when the Kachinas descended in force, their arrival cracking the sky with storms. They were not a gentle rain, but the unleashed fury of the world defending its own. Atahsaia, sensing their power, emerged from his canyon roaring a challenge that shook the very stones. This was no simple hunt. It was a war for the soul of the land itself. The Kachinas, embodying creation and life-giving water, moved with a purpose that was both beautiful and terrible. Where they stepped, the parched earth bloomed with sudden, vibrant flowers, a direct insult to the demon's nature of barren consumption. Atahsaia, a creature of drought and death, withered the plants beneath his feet, leaving a trail of blackened, cracked soil. He lunged with his obsidian claws, but the Kachinas did not meet him with brute force. They wove around him, their movements a fluid dance of evasion and power. Lightning, called from the heart of the storm, did not strike to kill him, but to bind him, forging chains of pure energy that seared his shadowy flesh. He thrashed and bit, his gaping maw snapping at the empty air where a Kachina had been a moment before. The battle was a symphony of opposing elements, the nourishing rain against the devouring drought, the song of life against the silence of the void. The Catchina's voices rose in a sacred chant that solidified the air around the demon, slowing his movements as if he were trapped in hardening clay. He was being cornered not by walls of stone, but by the very essence of the order he sought to destroy. His greatest weapon, his cunning, was useless here. His mimicking cries were drowned out by the Catchina's unwavering hymns. His illusions of darkness were burned away by their inherent spiritual light. This struggle was the ultimate expression of the Zuni worldview, a visible, violent manifestation of the constant, unseen conflict between harmony and chaos. The Catchinas did not seek to obliterate Atahsaia, for his existence served a purpose. He was the necessary contrast, the shadow that gave definition to the light. Their victory was one of banishment, not annihilation. With a final, concerted effort, they drove him back, herding his monstrous form deeper into the most desolate and inaccessible reaches of the wilderness. They reforged the boundary between the human world and the wild, reminding all that while chaos exists, it can be held at bay by faith, courage, and the enduring power of the sacred. The silence that followed the storm was not empty but full of a hard-won peace. The weapons that finally subdued Atahsaia were not forged of stone or wood, but of faith. To fight a demon woven from chaos, the Zuni wielded the most potent forces they knew, the sacred instruments that maintained the world's balance. Foremost among these were the prayer sticks or pahos. These were not simple pieces of wood. They were meticulously crafted offerings, each feather, each painted line, and each type of wood chosen for its specific spiritual meaning. A paho was a direct line of communication to the Catchinas, a physical prayer planted in the earth. When a warrior or priest placed one in the ground, he was not just asking for help, he was actively participating in the cosmic order, reinforcing the very structures of reality that Atahsaia sought to tear down. Think of them as anchors of harmony, driven into the soil to hold the world steady against the demon's disruptive hunger. Alongside these, sacred cornmeal became a weapon of pure sanctity. This was not mere food, but the powdered essence of life itself, the product of generations of careful cultivation under the sun and rain brought by the Catchinas. To cast a handful of this pale dust toward the demon was to hurl the concept of creation into the face of consumption. It was a barrier of pure blessing, a substance so antithetical to his nature that it could break his illusions and force him to reveal his true, monstrous form. A conventional spear might glance off his hardened skin, but a cloud of consecrated cornmeal could make him recoil in spiritual pain. The rituals themselves were a form of warfare. The chants and dances performed by the bow priests were not mere ceremonies, they were strategic operations. Their rhythmic steps and unified voices created a resonant field of order, a sonic fortress that the demon's chaotic essence could not penetrate. These rituals drew power from the collective will of the entire community, transforming individual fear into a focused spiritual force. Why would a song be more effective than an arrow? Because Atahsaia was a being of spiritual imbalance, and the ritual song was the embodiment of balance, a weapon that attacked his very reason for existence. The most powerful of these spiritual weapons were the actual manifestations of the Catchinas. When these beings descended, they did not carry ordinary arms. They wielded bolts of lightning that were both physical and spiritual. They commanded the winds to become binding ropes, and they used their sacred knowledge to unravel the dark magic Atahsaia relied upon. His greatest strength was his ability to deceive, to twist perception and prey on human emotion. Against the Catchina's pure spiritual perception, that power was useless. They saw the truth behind every illusion, the demon cowering behind the mirage of a lost child. This reveals the profound lesson at the heart of the conflict. You cannot defeat a force of chaos with chaos. You cannot outdeceive a master of lies. Victory lies in embracing the very opposite of what the enemy represents. Against hunger, offer the sacredness of sustenance. Against isolation, wield the power of community. Against the void of darkness, summon the unbreakable light of a shared prayer. The story of Atahsaia teaches that some battles are won not by matching an enemy's power, but by countering it with its absolute opposite. So Atahsaia was driven back, banished to the most remote and desolate canyons, but he was never truly destroyed. This is a crucial point. In the Zuni worldview, a force like Atahsaia cannot be eradicated, only contained. He is a necessary part of the cosmic balance, the perpetual shadow that gives definition to the light. His existence as a constant, though distant, threat served a profound purpose. It reminded the people that harmony is not a passive state, but an active, daily practice. The peace won by the Kachinas was not a permanent victory, but a reaffirmation of a boundary. It was a declaration that the ordered world of the village, upheld by prayer and community, would always have the strength to push back the encroaching wild. Think of it like a garden that requires constant tending. Weeds, representing chaos and neglect, will always find a way to sprout. You do not expect to rid the earth of weeds forever, but you tend your garden diligently to keep them from choking out the life you cultivate. Atahsaia is that ever-present weed, a force of nature that must be managed, not wished away. His banishment did not mean he ceased to be. It meant he was kept in his proper place, far from the hearth fires and the cornfields, a lesson held at bay but never forgotten. Why would a culture choose to keep such a terrifying figure in its mythology, never allowing him a final, conclusive end? Because his continued existence, even in exile, is what gives their rituals meaning and their courage its edge. He is the reason the bow priests must remain vigilant, the reason the Kachinas are still called upon in ceremony. He is the cold wind that makes the warmth of the community all the more precious. The story assures the people that they possess the tools and the spiritual strength to contain the chaos he represents, generation after generation. The demon's defeat was never about his death, but about the enduring power of a people to define their world against the void. Atahsaia's true power did not come from his claws or his size, but from the profound cultural taboos he embodied. To the Zuni, he was a walking, breathing lesson in the consequences of spiritual and social transgression. Breaking a tribal taboo was not a simple misstep. It was an act that rippled through the entire community, weakening the invisible bonds that connected them to the land, the spirits, and to one another. Atahsaia was the ultimate transgressor, a being defined by his complete rejection of these sacred rules. His cannibalism was the final expression of a life lived in opposition to everything the Zuni held dear, a symbol of what happens when an individual or a force consumes without thought for the whole. He was not just a monster, he was a cautionary tale made flesh, a stark reminder that selfishness and gluttony could unravel the world. His relentless hunger mirrors the destructive potential of gluttony within a society built on careful sharing. In the harsh desert environment, every kernel of corn, every drop of water was precious and had to be distributed with respect and foresight. A person who hoarded food, who took more than their share, was acting against the survival of the entire village. They were, in a symbolic sense, consuming the future of their own people. Atahsaia is this concept externalized and magnified to a terrifying extreme. He does not just take an extra portion, he consumes the very source of life itself, the women and children. He represents the end point of pure, unchecked self-interest, a force that devours the community from the inside out until nothing remains but a silent, empty pueblo. Ultimately, he is the embodiment of chaos, the ever-present threat that the orderly world of prayer and agriculture could collapse back into a state of raw, desperate survival. The Zuni did not believe the universe was inherently safe or benevolent. They understood it as a delicate equilibrium that required constant maintenance through ritual, ethical living, and communal effort. Atahsaia was the storm that could wipe out the crops, the drought that could crack the earth, the internal strife that could fracture a community. His existence in their stories served as a perpetual warning. It reinforced why their traditions were not empty formalities but vital survival strategies. The ceremonies, the prayers, the social codes, these were the tools they used to build a wall against the chaos he represented. Why follow the rules so strictly? Because the alternative was a world where an Atahsaia could walk right in. His legend taught that spiritual order was not a luxury, but the very foundation of their existence, a fragile light that required every single person to help keep it burning against the encroaching dark. Atahsaia was not the only monster haunting the edges of the Zuni world. He belonged to a broader, terrifying class of beings known as the Kayaklo, a term that translates to the demons or the fearsome ones. These were not a unified army but a collection of distinct and malevolent spirits, each representing a different facet of the chaos that threatened the pueblo. For instance, there were demons who personified specific diseases, their presence felt in the sudden fever that racked a body or the cough that would not subside. Others were spirits of starvation, lurking in barren fields during a drought, their forms as gaunt and desolate as the landscape they inhabited. Some were tricksters of a far more malicious sort than the familiar coyote, leading travelers astray not for fun, but to perish from thirst or a fatal fall. Yet even among this grim pantheon, Atahsaia held a uniquely horrifying position. While a diseased demon might claim lives through invisible means and a starvation spirit worked through the slow, impersonal force of nature, Atahsaia's evil was intimate and deliberate. He did not simply cause death as a consequence of his nature. He actively sought it out with a terrifying intelligence, hunting specific individuals and consuming them. His transgression was not just against the body, but against the soul of the community, targeting the sacred bonds of family and the promise of the future itself. This personal, predatory hunger is what elevated him above other Kayaklo. A storm demon might destroy a season's crops, a terrible but impersonal blow. But Atahsaia's choice to hunt women and children was a direct, symbolic assault on the community's ability to continue existing at all. He was not merely a force of nature, he was a force of anti-culture, a being whose very purpose was to unravel the social and spiritual fabric that the Zuni worked so hard to weave. This is why his name, the cannibal, resonates with such profound dread, marking him as the ultimate violator in a world defined by sacred balance. This deep-seated fear of the cannibal is not unique to the Zuni people. Across the globe and throughout time, human cultures have conjured remarkably similar monsters, each a dark mirror reflecting a universal terror of being consumed. The Algonquian tribes of the northeastern forests told of the Wendigo, a being born from the desperation of starvation and winter. Like Atahsaia, the Wendigo was a gaunt, towering creature, a cannibal spirit that could possess a person who resorted to eating human flesh in the depths of famine. Both creatures are more than mere predators. They are the embodiments of the ultimate taboo, representing the moment a community turns inward and consumes itself. While Atahsaia is an external force hunting from the wilderness, the Wendigo often begins as an internal threat, a neighbor or even a family member transformed by hunger into a monstrous other. This distinction highlights a shared anxiety from different environments. For the desert-dwelling Zuni, the external, chaotic wild was the primary source of danger. For the forest-dwelling Algonquians, the greater fear was the internal collapse of social bonds during the long, isolating winter. Both monsters, however, serve the same core purpose, to reinforce the sacred rule that cannibalism is an unforgivable line that must never be crossed, for it annihilates one's very humanity. Journey across the Atlantic to the misty fens of Scandinavia, and you will find Grendel, the infamous foe from the epic poem Beowulf. Stalking the great hall of Hjorot, this creature is described as a descendant of Cain, an outcast from the world of men who bears a seething hatred for their joy and community. His attacks are not for sustenance in the way a wolf hunts, but are acts of pure malice, a rage against the light, music, and fellowship that define human society. When Grendel bursts into the hall and devours the warriors, he is consuming the very essence of their community, much like Atahsaia targets the life-giving women of the Zuni. Both are destroyers of sacred spaces, Hiorat being a place of political and social order, just as the Zuni home is a place of familial and agricultural continuity. They cannot abide the sounds of human happiness because it is a testament to the order they are excluded from. These monsters are not just physical threats, they are existential ones, forces of isolation and silence that seek to extinguish the collective human spirit. What is it about a communal feast or a song sung together that so enraged these ancient horrors? It is the evidence of a bond they can never be part of, a harmony that their very existence denies. Even the rugged Norse giants, the Jotnar, often embodied this theme of consumption, though on a cosmic scale. While not all were cannibals in the human sense, they were frequently portrayed as chaotic forces seeking to devour the world order established by the gods. They represented the untamed, destructive aspects of nature, the frost and fire that could swallow civilizations. This idea of a monstrous other that consumes what we have built is a thread that weaves through these disparate mythologies. Whether it is Atahsaia's personal, intimate hunger for human flesh, the Wendigo's embodiment of selfish consumption, Grendel's vengeful feasting, or a giant's world-ending appetite, the pattern is unmistakable. These stories reveal a profound cross-cultural truth. The fear of being consumed, of having our bodies, our communities, or our entire world devoured by an insatiable other, is one of humanity's most primal and shared nightmares. They are not just stories to frighten children, but complex cultural tools. They externalize our deepest anxieties about starvation, societal collapse, and the fragile nature of our own morality, giving them a form that can be confronted, understood, and ultimately held at bay by the collective courage and faith of the community. For centuries, Atahsaia existed only in the breath and memory of the Zuni people. His legend was a living story, passed from elder to child in the flickering glow of a fire, its details shaped by the voice of the storyteller and the needs of the time. This was a world of oral tradition where myths were not fixed in ink but were dynamic, breathing parts of the cultural fabric. Each telling was an act of preservation, a way to weave the lessons of the past into the present moment. The rhythm of the story, the specific inflections used for the Kachina's chants or the demon's roar, these were the tools that kept the knowledge alive. But how does a story survive the relentless passage of time, the threat of forgotten words, and the seismic shifts of a changing world? The answer arrived not from within the pueblo, but from outsiders armed with notebooks and a newfound respect for indigenous wisdom. In the late 19th century, anthropologists like Frank Hamilton Cushing and Matilda Cox Stevenson entered the Zuni world. They did not come as conquerors, but as dedicated observers, seeking to understand and document a way of life they saw was under immense pressure. Frank Hamilton Cushing's approach was particularly remarkable. He did not just visit the Zuni, he lived with them for years, becoming deeply integrated into their society. He learned their language, participated in their ceremonies, and was even initiated into the Bow Priest Society, the very order that stood against forces like Atahsaia. Through this profound immersion, Cushing earned a level of trust that allowed him to record myths and rituals that had never been written down before. He listened as elders recounted the tales of the cannibal demon, carefully transcribing the narratives that explain the creature's origins, his cunning, and his eventual banishment. He understood that these were not mere campfire tales, but the foundational pillars of Zuni spirituality and social order. At nearly the same time, Matilda Cox Stevenson was conducting her own meticulous research. Her work was exhaustive, documenting everything from religious practices to daily life, ensuring that the context for myths like Atahsaia's was preserved. She recorded the roles of women, the very targets of the demon's hunger, providing an invaluable perspective on why his predation was so culturally devastating. The act of writing these stories down was a transformation. It froze a fluid oral tradition into a fixed form, creating a permanent record that could withstand the erosion of time. This was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it safeguarded the stories from being lost forever. On the other, it removed them from the living, adaptive context of oral performance. A story told by firelight changes with the audience, the season, and the teller's purpose. A story printed in a book remains the same, yet without this crucial work, we might have only fragments of the Atahsaia legend today. The dedication of these early ethnographers provided a bridge, allowing a myth born in the high desert to journey into the modern world, ensuring that the warning of the cannibal demon would not be silenced. The cannibal demon's shadow still falls across the Zuni world, but its meaning has deepened with time. Atahsaia is far from a forgotten relic. He remains a vibrant and potent symbol in modern Zuni life, his story carefully passed down to new generations. Grandparents still share his tale with children, not merely to frighten them, but to instill a profound understanding of cultural boundaries. The warning is clear: stray too far from the community, ignore the teachings of your elders, or act with selfish greed, and you risk inviting a different kind of Atahsaia into your life. He has evolved from a literal monster in the canyon to a powerful metaphor for contemporary dangers, representing the corrosive forces of addiction, materialism, and the loss of traditional values that can consume a person's spirit just as surely as the demon consumed flesh. His legend is a moral compass, a timeless narrative that teaches the consequences of transgression and the vital importance of staying connected to one's community and heritage. This enduring relevance is visible in the vibrant artistic expressions of the Zuni people. Master carvers sometimes shape his fearsome visage from stone, transforming the symbol of chaos into a controlled, tangible object of contemplation. These aren't idols for worship, but physical reminders of the lessons he embodies. His form appears in paintings and pottery, a stark, dark figure contrasted against the bright, life-affirming symbols of rain, corn, and the Kachinas. In these artworks, the eternal struggle between order and chaos is frozen in time, a visual story that continues to speak volumes. During sacred ceremonies, especially those reenacting the great confrontations between the Kachinas and the destructive forces, the spirit of Atahsaia is invoked. While a performer may not literally embody the demon in the way a Kachina is portrayed, his presence is deeply felt in the narratives and prayers. These rituals are not simple plays, they are active participations in the cosmic order, rehearsals for maintaining spiritual vigilance. By ceremonially facing Atahsaia again and again, the community reaffirms its collective strength and its commitment to the values that keep such chaos at bay. The demon's greatest modern role may be as a guardian of identity itself. In a world of rapid change and external influences, the story of Atahsaia draws a powerful line between what it means to be Zuni and what threatens that identity. He is the ultimate outsider, the embodiment of all that is antithetical to their worldview. Keeping his story alive is an act of cultural resilience, a way of saying that the lessons of the past are the armor for the future. The cannibal demon is no longer just a monster from a dark cave. He has become a timeless teacher, his terrifying legend a permanent part of the living heart of the Zuni people. This ancient guardian of Zuni values has begun to step out of the desert and into the global spotlight. While not a household name like some mythological beasts, Atahsaia is making his way into modern media, appearing in the pages of fantasy novels and the digital worlds of video games. Here, creators hungry for unique monsters find a rich and terrifying source in his legend. He might be reimagined as a boss enemy in a role-playing game, a towering creature that players must outsmart rather than simply overpower, echoing his clever, deceptive nature. In contemporary horror literature, authors drawn to indigenous folklore sometimes adapt his story, using his cannibalistic hunger as a metaphor for insatiable modern anxieties. This newfound attention is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it introduces a fascinating and profound figure from Native American mythology to a wider audience, sparking curiosity and appreciation for Zuni culture. It is a form of validation, showing that these stories hold a power that resonates far beyond their place of origin. Yet this reinterpretation often comes at a cost. When a deeply sacred being is lifted from its cultural context and dropped into a commercial product, it risks being stripped of its meaning. The Atahsaia of popular culture can easily become just another generic monster, a scary face in a bestiary. His role as a teacher, a symbol of the consequences of breaking taboos and the importance of community, is often the first thing to be lost. The nuance of his battle with the Katchinas, a struggle representing the balance between order and chaos, can be flattened into a simple fight between good and evil. This process of appropriation can feel like a new form of consumption, where the spiritual depth of a culture is devoured for entertainment value. How do we honor these stories without draining them of their soul? The key lies in respectful engagement, in seeking to understand the context from which these beings emerged. When a game developer or author takes the time to learn why Atahsaia hunted women, or what the Katchinas truly represent, the resulting portrayal can be powerful and authentic. It becomes an invitation to learn more, a gateway into a rich and living tradition. The journey of the cannibal demon from a whispered warning in the high desert to a pixelated enemy on a screen reflects a world where all myths are now connected. It challenges us to be thoughtful explorers, to look beyond the monster's claws and see the ancient, enduring wisdom in its shadow. This journey into the world of Atahsaia raises a vital question for all of us who listen to and share these powerful stories. Where is the line between appreciation and appropriation? The Zuni people have safeguarded this narrative for generations, not as a simple monster tale, but as a living vessel of their values, history, and spiritual identity. To lift Atahsaia from this sacred context and repackage him as just another scary creature for mass consumption is to repeat the very act of taking that his story warns against. It drains the legend of its profound meaning, reducing a complex symbol of cultural taboos into a hollowed-out shell used for mere entertainment. Think of it like a beautiful, intricately painted pot. You can admire its form and colors, but if you use it without understanding its ceremonial purpose, you miss its true significance and show disrespect for the culture that created it. The same is true for these myths. Sharing them widely can be a beautiful act of cultural exchange, but it must be done with a foundation of deep respect and a commitment to accuracy. This means acknowledging the Zuni people as the rightful creators and keepers of their stories. It involves seeking out sources from within the community or from ethnographers who worked in close partnership with them, rather than relying on second-hand summaries that often flatten the narrative's richness. When we encounter Atahsaia in a video game or a novel, we should ask, does this portrayal honor the demon's role as a teacher of balance and consequence? Or is he simply a monster to be slain? The responsibility falls on storytellers and audiences alike to move beyond a superficial fascination with the monstrous and toward a genuine understanding of the cultural wisdom these beings protect. By listening first and foremost to the voices of the culture itself, we ensure that these ancient stories are not just taken, but are truly heard, preserving their power and their purpose for generations to come. The stones of Hawaka whisper a history written long before any written record. This ancient Zuni pueblo, its ruins weathering under the same sun that witnessed Atahsaia's legend, offers a tangible link to the world that created the cannibal demon. Archaeological excavations here reveal a story of resilience etched into every pottery shard and foundation stone. Life in this high desert was a constant negotiation with scarcity. The bones of game animals show evidence of being used down to the marrow. Storage pits, carefully lined and sealed, speak to a society that understood the critical importance of preserving every kernel of corn against the threat of a lean season. In this world, hunger was not an abstract concept, it was a palpable presence, a specter that haunted the edges of every harvest. The very architecture of the pueblos, with their thick, windowless outer walls and entryways through the roof, was a defensive posture not just against human enemies, but against the harsh elements and the unseen dangers of the spiritual landscape. It was a world built to keep chaos out and order in. This is the soil from which the myth of Atahsaia grew. His gaping maw and insatiable hunger are the ultimate embodiment of that ever-present fear of famine. When the rains failed and the corn withered in the field, it must have felt as if a great, invisible demon was consuming their future. Atahsaia gave that terrifying force a name and a form, transforming an existential anxiety into a monster that could, in stories at least, be confronted and driven back. The discovery of ceremonial artifacts near these ancient sites, objects used in rituals to call upon the Cachinas for rain and protection, shows how the spiritual and the practical were one and the same. The people did not just build granaries, they built a mythology of defense. The prayers for rain were as vital as the irrigation canals. The story of the Cachinas battling Atahsaia was not mere entertainment. It was a spiritual blueprint for survival, a narrative that taught each generation how to marshal their collective will against the forces of consumption and despair. The demon was born from the very real dust of the desert, a terrifying answer to the question of why life in such a beautiful, harsh land could feel so perilously balanced on the edge of a knife. At the heart of this terrifying legend lies a quiet, enduring truth about the human condition. The story of Atahsaia is not merely a relic of ancient fear, but a profound exploration of the boundaries that hold a society together. It teaches us that civilization is a fragile construction, a constant choice between nurturing the community and succumbing to the monstrous temptations of pure self-interest. This cannibal demon represents the ultimate selfishness, the part of us that would consume everything without thought for the future or for others. His hunger is a mirror held up to our own potential for gluttony, for hoarding resources, for putting our own desires above the well-being of the whole. The Zuni understood that this internal monster is the true threat, and Atahsaia is its external, symbolic form, a warning that we must always guard against the chaos within ourselves. How do we keep that inner demon at bay? The answer the myth provides is as relevant now as it was 1,000 years ago. It is through the strength of our community. Just as the Zuni relied on the bow priests, the Cachinas, and the collective will of the pueblo, we too depend on our social bonds, our shared values, and our mutual responsibilities. The myth insists that we are not meant to face our demons alone. Isolation is the demon's territory, a place where selfishness can grow unchecked, but connection, cooperation, and shared purpose form the sacred circle that the monster cannot cross. This is why Atahsaia targeted those who nurtured life and connection, because he knew that to break the community, he had to sever its most vital bonds. His defeat by the collective force of the Cachinas and the people is a timeless lesson in unity. It tells us that the antidote to the consuming I is the sustaining we. Beyond our social world, the myth speaks to our relationship with the natural world itself. Atahsaia dwells in the chaotic wilderness, the untamed spaces beyond the ordered fields and villages. He is the embodiment of nature's indifference, the drought that kills the crops, the storm that destroys the home. The Zuni did not see nature as an enemy to be conquered, but as a powerful, living force that demanded respect and reciprocity. To live in harmony with the land was to acknowledge its power and to give back through prayer and offerings. To live out of balance, to take without gratitude, was to invite the spirit of Atahsaia. In this way, the legend is an ancient echo of modern ecological wisdom. It reminds us that we are part of a delicate web, not its masters. When we consume recklessly, when we disrespect the balance of the natural world, we unleash a different kind of cannibal, one that devours the very systems that support our lives. The demon story forces us to ask, what are the true monsters we face today? Are they not the forces of greed, isolation, and environmental disregard that threaten to consume our future? Atahsaia's legacy is this powerful, multi-layered warning. He is the shadow that gives the light its meaning, the chaos that makes us value order, the hunger that reminds us to be grateful for our shared feast. He teaches us that the struggle between our civilized selves and our baser instincts is eternal, but it is a battle we are equipped to win, so long as we remember to tend the fires of community, to walk with respect upon the earth, and to always listen for the sacred songs that bind our world together. The legend of Atahsaia is far more than a simple monster tale. This cannibal demon, with his cunning deceptions and his hunger for the very heart of the community, represents a primal battle between order and chaos. His epic confrontations with the Kachina spirits were not just for the safety of one village, but for the soul of the Zuni world itself. He stands as a permanent symbol of the taboos that bind a society together and the terrifying consequences of their violation. Yet his story also carries a profound reassurance that through collective courage, spiritual faith, and unwavering unity, the darkness can be held at bay. The true power of this myth lies in its timeless reflection of our own inner struggles. The monsters that haunt our oldest stories are never truly gone. They linger in the shadows of our fears, in the whispers of our greed, and in the quiet moments when we choose between self and community. They are the eternal counterbalance, the darkness that makes us cherish the light. So the next time you hear a strange sound in the night or feel a chill of unease, remember the lessons of the desert, remember Atahsaia. What other ancient demons haunt the corners of world mythology, and what do they tell us about the cultures that created them? Share the most terrifying mythological being you know in the comments below, and subscribe to continue exploring the profound mysteries of our shared human past.